Welcome to the Sacred Thread podcast, where we explore spirituality, psychology, and the deeper questions of what it means to be human. I'm your host, Winston Janis. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Sacred Thread podcast. As I just mentioned, my name is Winston Janis, and I'm your host. I just want to say I'm glad that you're here. I'm excited to be starting this podcast. Would you all do something with me real quick? Let's just take a brief pause to check in with ourselves. Wherever you are, if you're driving, doing the dishes, folding laundry, just notice your breathing. Notice its flow and rhythm right now. Notice how the breath breathes itself in your body. Thanks for doing that with me. It's good to come back to that simple awareness as often as we can, right? There's a quote I recently came across by Elizabeth Lamb, where she says, "Pausing is the doorway to awakening." We pause not only with our body, but also with our mind. And sometimes we can be attentive, and sometimes we cannot. But that's all right. For the next moment always brings us the fresh possibility to pause and be present again. There are no steps to follow. There is no enlightenment to work toward. There's only the simplicity of relaxing into this very moment that is complete in itself. I thought that was a good reminder, so wanted to share that with you. But anyway, a little bit about me, for those of you who don't really know me. I'm a certified mindfulness meditation teacher, a licensed therapist, and a former pastor. I'm starting this podcast to talk to you all about mindfulness, mysticism, and meaning. I want to create a space to reflect and have conversations about the deeper things in life, about what matters and what's important. At the same time, I want to talk about how we ought to live and how we can live in healthier, more spiritually connected ways. You know, we live in a world that's moving fast pretty much all the time, and a world that values productivity over presence a lot of the time, certainty over mystery, and polarization over compassion and understanding. But beneath all that noise, I believe more and more people are quietly hungering for depth, for meaning, for stillness, for rest. And I want to speak to that hunger, to name it so that we can satisfy it together. I believe there's a thread that connects all of us, and there's a thread that connects the topics that I've devoted my life to: psychology, spirituality, mental health, Christianity, Buddhism, and mysticism. The therapist in me wants to offer you therapeutic tools through this podcast, but more than just that, I want to offer healing that's grounded in psychology, but nourished by spirit. I really believe in my work as a therapist, but I want to go deeper, to weave in more soul and depth. I want to talk about who we are and our place in the universe. And I don't always get to do that in my counseling practice. But I think we're at a time when we need more of that. Not religious fundamentalism, but healthy spirituality. We need new ways of understanding what it means to be human in this time and place, in this context. We need to connect with a sense of meaning and purpose, to remember who we are in all this, to find wholeness and a sense of belonging with each other and with the divine. A lot of people are leaving the religion they were raised in right now. Not necessarily because they've stopped caring, but because the versions they inherited no longer hold up for them. Maybe they were too rigid, too black and white, too disconnected from real life. I've been there, and I know what it's like to question everything and wonder if you still belong. But I also believe that in the ashes of our old beliefs, something new can emerge, something with more depth, wisdom, and wholeness. Let me share a little of my backstory with you so we can get to know each other here. So I was born in Connecticut, an only child, although I do have a half-sister as well. My parents divorced right around the time I was born. I was raised Catholic on my mother's side, Protestant on my father's side. We went to a variety of different Protestant churches, more evangelical leaning. And I remember from a young age, I was drawn to books on philosophy and religion. My father's bookshelves were full of them. Books by Meister Eckhart, Soren Kierkegaard, books on Zen and poetry, books on the Bible. To me, they were like spell books, ancient scrolls that belonged to some wizard, that contained magic, that contained the secrets of the universe and answers to the mysteries of existence. And I always loved being exposed to that, and I loved having deep conversations with other people about deep things, the big questions of life. Although it's not always easy to find people to have those conversations with. But anyway, for the most of my early years, I had pretty basic Christian beliefs, I would say, and I went to Christian college for undergrad, majored in philosophy. But in my 20s, I went through this kind of process of deconstruction that a lot of us hear about. Questioning beliefs, re-examining worldview. I became a therapist after undergrad, got my master's in mental health counseling. And during that time, I discovered some of my favorite teachers to this day, like Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Jack Kornfield, Richard Rohr, and Thich Nhat Hanh, among a lot of others. Just deconstruction wasn't just about letting go of certain beliefs. It was about discovering new voices and ideas. It was about reclaiming my own spiritual voice, not necessarily in opposition to Christianity, but in search of deeper layers within it. Generally, I found myself drawn to the mystical streams of faith, to Buddhist psychology, and to silence and presence and compassion. Those things really resonated with me. And they connected with my work as a therapist as well. Eventually, though, I got the opportunity to go to seminary, and I felt really drawn to do that. I went to Boston University. Initially, I went to ILIF, School of Theology in Denver, Colorado, but was only there for a short time. Decided to shift, move to Boston to be closer to family, and my wife's family at the time as well. But was in pursuit of ordained ministry. And while in school, I experienced a mental health crisis and started having severe anxiety and panic attacks. Eventually, I overcame my panic attacks through therapy, meditation, and lots of practice. Spoiler alert, I still get anxious here and there. I think partly I'm just wired that way, but thankfully it's not nearly as bad as it once was. And I did become a pastor for a time. And by the way, all along this path, I also had 3 kids along the way, and eventually left the ministry to realize that even though in some ways, obviously, I'm very interested in religion, spirituality, and helping others in a practical way, there are ways in which it wasn't maybe the best fit for me. Working with large groups of people, doing lots of organizational kind of administrative tasks, being a leader in that capacity. It was during COVID. It was a complicated time, but decided to leave the ministry and return to my work as a therapist. Felt much more in my element there in a lot of ways. Went through a divorce, had a couple terrible bouts of insomnia, a little bit of addiction, got an ADHD diagnosis, and became a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. Graduated from a program that was created by the well-known meditation teachers and clinical psychologists Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach, which was a really wonderful experience in a lot of ways. So it's a 2-year-long program. Anyway, I know that's a lot. I could probably spend all day telling you my life story. But for now, I just wanted to give you some highlights so you know a little bit about me and who you're dealing with here. And I also wanted to share a little bit about what I've been through, because although some of the things I just named really sucked to go through, in a way I'm grateful, honestly, because I think that life experience I had makes me a better therapist and teacher. The line of work I'm in, the spiritual interests I have, they can't ignore the reality of suffering, right? It's not just a part of my life. It's a part of all of our lives. We all given our measure of suffering that we need to deal with. And I think one of the major questions that we all have to wrestle with is, how do we hold that suffering? And how do we transform it? And so I think that's something that we can explore in this podcast. Which leads me to the question, maybe, why am I starting this podcast, right? Well, right before I started working as a pastor, and I was searching for a position, I did have a podcast for a while. It was called Second Table, and honestly, it was a really great experience. I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with a lot of amazing people, a lot of authors and teachers and fellow podcasters, mostly in the progressive Christian world. People like Barbara Brown Taylor, Brian McLaren, Diana Butler Bass, Peter Rollins, a lot of others too. Unfortunately, life got too busy and I had to take a break that ended up being years, never returning to the podcast until now. But the experience has really stayed with me. It was so cool to be able to have those conversations, to engage with fascinating people and really powerful and deep ideas and concepts, and to be able to share that with others. In our culture, so many of us lack community. And I believe a podcast like this can help us tap into and create community. It can help start conversations, right, about what's important. It's really, I view it as an invitation to engage in dialogue with one another about meaningful topics. Because here's the thing, beneath the surface of our productivity and politics and our culture, so many people are lonely. We're disconnected not only from each other, but even from ourselves. And in that loneliness, it's easy to turn toward extremes, towards fundamentalism, cynicism, addiction, and distraction. But what we really need isn't more noise, right? Or more stimulation or more certainty. I think we need more spaces of stillness, curiosity, openness, and sacred connection. So I'm not really here necessarily to give answers or dogma. Instead, I want to question, explore, and practice out loud together. I've been exposed to a lot of wisdom, and I do want to share that. But I'm also still a seeker myself. And I want to invite you to explore with me. I want to remind you of the things that nourish your soul, and in the process to remind myself as well. We all need reminders. So again, this podcast is a way for me to weave together the thread that connects the interests in my life: spirituality, psychology, philosophy, mental health, mysticism, mindfulness, Buddhist practice, and contemplative Christianity. I love all of it. And likewise, I'm a big believer that, like I said, we're radically living in a radically interconnected universe, right? And I do believe that there's a sacred thread that connects all of the great religious traditions of the world. And there's also a sacred thread that connects me to you and us to nature and to everyone and everything. And my hope is that this podcast will also make us increasingly aware of that sacred thread and our oneness. So what can you expect going forward here? My thought is that the podcast will mostly feature interviews with teachers, writers, mystics, therapists, friends, and fellow travelers on the spiritual path. Occasionally, I think episodes will be more like this, just me offering a reflection, a story, a meditation, a moment of stillness in the midst of it all. But we'll see how things unfold and they develop. But we'll talk about mindfulness and mental health, compassion, suffering, joy, climate change, reimagining God, deconstruction, and reconstructing faith, spiritual experience, and the inner life that so often gets pushed to the margins in our culture. And probably a lot of other things I haven't even named, right? But anyway, if what I've said resonates with you, I'd love for you to subscribe or to share this with someone who might need to hear it. Also, just a note that you can find me on Substack. I have a newsletter that I try to publish to regularly at winstonjanis.substack.com. You can also find me on Instagram at sacred_thread87. I'd love to hear from you and what you're longing for, what you're wrestling with, or what sacred threads you're following. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this. See you next time.